George Floyd was an innocent man who was murdered by an evil, racist, brutal police officer by the name of Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin murdered Floyd by pressing his knee against the side of Floyd's neck, ignoring his pleas. I can't breathe, cried George Floyd as Chauvin hovered above him, his knee pressing against the side of his neck, callously. This is the common narrative when it comes to the George Floyd story. And you have people saying, well, George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe, while Chauvin's knee was pressed against the side of his neck. So therefore, Chauvin cut off Floyd's breathing. It was the neck. That's what did it, everyone. It was the neck. We have solved the crime. But what did Floyd have in his blood? He had two very dangerous drugs, methamphetamine and fentanyl. And the media says, well, it was just a small dose of meth, but there was a lot of fentanyl. And what does fentanyl do if you take too much? If you take too much fentanyl, one of the side effects is extreme difficulty breathing or the cutting off of one's breath. You either have a lot of difficulty breathing or your breathing just stops. This is one of the side effects of fentanyl, and this is how fentanyl kills you if you take too much. Well, Floyd had a lot of fentanyl in his blood. Now, why did he have meth and fentanyl in his blood? Because on the streets, there is a common street drug recipe in which you mix meth with fentanyl. So it's not like Floyd was just, on his way to the library. He was on his way to college. He was just trying to get that education until a racist white cop just murdered him. No. He had a street drug recipe in his blood, and he was taking a lot of fentanyl. And one of the side effects of fentanyl is that it cuts off your breathing and kills you. So people jump to conclusions. They see the video and they say, well, the knee is on the side of the neck, and he's saying I can't breathe, so therefore it's the knee. You see, we solved the crime, everyone. It's the knee. But the body cam footage from Chauvin's uniform was released to the public today. And I watched it. And do you know what it shows? It shows exactly what has been shown to the public already. That when Floyd was in the car, he wasn't complying with the police, for one. He was not being cooperative with the police. And when you do not comply with officers, officers will restrain you. That's their job. They are called law enforcement for a reason. They are there to enforce the law. They're not there to be a social worker. They're not there to be your shrink. They're not there to see, well, are you okay? Are you mentally stable? Are you a mentally stable person? Has racism affected your psychological disposition whatsoever? They're not there to do that. They are there to enforce the law. And the fact is that Floyd stole a pack of cigarettes. He stole a pack of cigarettes with a fake $20 bill. The owner of the store realized this guy just robbed me, calls the police, and the cops show up. That's what happened. Nobody was walking around looking for black people to kill or to strangle to death. Chauvin didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to kill me a black guy today. Oh, and by the way, when you actually watch the footage, one of the officers involved in the arrest of Floyd is obviously African American. And when you look at the footage, Floyd, while he is in the police vehicle, is saying, I can't breathe. So while he was in the police car, he was saying, I can't breathe. While he was being restrained by Chauvin, and while Chauvin's knee was on the side of his neck, Floyd was saying, I can't breathe. So he couldn't breathe while he was in the car, and there was no knee on his neck. So maybe it wasn't the knee that did it. And maybe all these people who have been worshiping Floyd and, going to 50 different funerals for him have jumped to conclusions way too aggressively, way too fanatically. And that's the problem with lefties. They jump to conclusions way too quickly, and they end up having some very, very violent outbursts without thinking anything through, because they have already jumped to conclusions, because they live in a fantasy that says, well, if we don't destroy the system, and that includes the police, then all the black people are going to be killed or forced into the plantations again. He was saying, I can't breathe, while he was in the car. So what was cutting off his breathing? What was hindering his breathing while he was in the car? He was saying that before Chauvin restrained him, or before Chauvin had his knee on the side of his neck. So what was making him say, I can't breathe? Oh, it just so happens that he had a drug in his blood. He had a lot of a drug in his blood that hinders breathing and or cuts off breathing and kills a person. Just so happened that this drug was in his blood. Just so happened that he had a drug that hinders your breathing or cuts off your breathing completely in his blood in a substantial amount. So I don't think it's that simple. It's the knee. It was Chauvin's knee. That's what did it, everybody. Yeah. People have jumped to conclusions that it was the knee that did it. But they're not even factoring in fentanyl. They're not even saying, well, fentanyl did it. No, they're jumping to conclusions that it was the knee. Why are they jumping to conclusions? Because they have a narrative that they want to be real. And this is the problem with lefties. Michael Savage said years ago that liberalism is a mental disorder. Now, I have my issues with Savage. I have my criticisms of him. No one is exempt from criticism. But at the same time, Michael Savage was right. Liberalism is indeed a mental disorder. Lefties have a fantasy in their brains that the system that they're living in is systematically racist and wants to harm or kill black people in some way, and that if they don't destroy the system, then they will not be rescuing blacks, but they will be allowing the system to kill black people. And so they have to destroy the system to save the black race or whatever. This is the fantasy that they have in their brains, and they want this fantasy to be real because they have a hero complex. They want to be the hero. They want to save the world. They are the V for Vendetta character with the Guy Fawkes mask. And it's with that type of mentality that a lot of people end up being murdered by lefties. It was with that mentality that Lenin butchered tens of thousands of fellow communists, of his own fellow communists in Georgia, the country, not the state, because he felt that these communists weren't the real deal. They were the weak communists who were just going to ruin the creation of his fantasy. It was with this mentality that the French revolutionaries butchered hundreds of thousands of people, because if we don't kill these people, then the utopia of liberté and égalité will not come to fruition. So we have to murder these people. You see, G.K. Chesterton talked about this. He talked about that. I think this was in his book, The Everlasting Man. He said that all murderers, not all murderers, but all murderous cults, utopian ideologues, all ideological, insidiously ideological movements, they all begin with a fantasy. And once they feel that that fantasy can come into a reality, they go crazy. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a bunch of people who want a fantasy to be a reality. This is the problem with lefties. They have no sense of boundaries. A violent crime happens or a shooting takes place, and their automatic conclusion is ban guns. A police officer does something in which someone dies. The automatic conclusion is that, well, if the person who died was black, therefore this was a racist murder. This was police brutality. Therefore, It's either abolish the police, defund the police, or do some kind of crazy police reform that's going to restrain cops from further executing their job. So this is the problem with lefties. They always jump to conclusions because they live in a fantasy. And they jump to the conclusion that they want to be real. They want Chauvin to be racist. They want this to be a hate crime. They want this to be a case of an evil white officer who's like, I'm going to kill me some colored folks today. They want that to be real because if it's real, then they can justify their revolution. Because make no mistake, when I read the articles about George Floyd, almost every single article has something like this. Derek Chauvin, a white police officer who murdered a black man named George Floyd, or it's who murdered or who was being accused of killing George Floyd, a black man. And they always have to stress the color aspect of it. Why? Think about it. Why do they always have to do it? They haven't even proved racism. They haven't proved that this had anything to do with race. And they're always saying, white officer killed by black man, even though this whole story has nothing to do with white people and black people. It has nothing to do with racial tension. One of the officers involved was African American. So why are they always saying this? Because they're trying to foment tension between blacks and whites. That's all this is. They're trying to stoke up the white man to get him pissed off. They're trying to stoke up that white rage where the right-wing types are going to be like, they keep attacking us because we're white, they hate us because we're white, and you're going to have agitators on both sides stoking the people up, stoking whites up and stoking black folks up. That's what this is. I know because it's quite obvious. Why are they always bringing up race? Why are they always specifying the color, the skin color of the two people involved in this case? Because it's about stoking racial tension. And you have agitators on both sides. And this is being done in a political atmosphere where racial agitation has become common. And this goes all the way back to 2014, 2015, when a lot of this type of thing, especially on the right-wing side, became more and more common. And it has become very, very common to hear people talk about, the plight of the white man, how the white man is tired of hearing about how bad he is. We're tired of hearing about how evil white men are. We're sick and tired of this. This is becoming very, very common. And you have the Jesse Lee Peterson types who are stoking that side up. So why would the media, in a political atmosphere like this, where we have social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, where you have these platforms where this sort of rhetoric can be preached, can be declared, why would the liberal media, the progressive media, in such a political atmosphere like this, be talking this way? It's crazy. They haven't even proved racism. You haven't even proved racism, and people are already jumping to the conclusion that this was murder, that this was some kind of racist murder, or that this was some kind of situation where a police officer just murders an innocent person. It's like none of this stuff makes sense. Well, it does make sense in the reality that the media is stoking things up, but to conclude racism, it just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.